Good evening, members. Good evening to our guests.
Good evening.
And our senior officers. So we'll get started on this, I think. Before we get to the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that we are not expecting the fire alarm to sound tonight. So if it does, please remain seated. And Miss Collier here to my right, which is in a lovely condition, so no rushing, everybody. We'll assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intended to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? And this is not to... I asked this question not to stop you, but to merely to ensure that members and other members on the public in the room know that this is taking place. Now we go to agenda item 1. Do we have any apologies?
Apologies of absence have been submitted by Councillor Perry.
Okay. Did you get the last chocolate one? Agenda item 2, notification and substitute members.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. Councillor Blackmore for Councillor Perry.
Lovely, thank you. Urgent items, there's no urgent items. Agenda item 4, notification of visiting members. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. I would like to speak on agenda item 11, please.
11. Okay, thank you. Item 5, disclosure by members and officers. Are there any disclosures? Members? Officers? Thank you. Agenda item 6, disclosure of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? Well, I think basically we all have, haven't we? Everybody been lobbied? Anybody? Yes, I have. I have on the strategic assessment. Yes. Agenda item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private. Because of disclosure exempt information, we have no yellow pages, do we? So we don't have to worry about that. Agenda item 8, we now turn to the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of March 2016, which starts at page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Can I sign that as true copy? Yeah? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Now we're going to agenda item 19, presentation of any petitions. I understand that we don't have any. Lovely. Questions and answers session for members of the public. I understand we don't have any questions. Agenda item 11, 2017-18 strategic assessment. Alison Broom and C.I. Gardner, and understand you would deliver a presentation on this report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody be first.
Before I start, I'm assuming that I have to sit down because of the webcast. Is that right? Oh, there might be a microphone. Good evening, everybody. In true partnership fashion, I and the Chief Inspector Gardner will be making a short presentation this evening Our aim is to give you an overview of what has happened via the Safer Maidstone Partnership over the last year, to explain some things to do with our assessment for next year, some operational changes and our proposed priorities for the upcoming year. So if I could just ask for somebody to press the button for me. So it might be that one. So, as I said, our aims are really to give you a flavour of what's been achieved over the last year, look forward to next year, and in that we'll be explaining a new method that has been used for the strategic assessment. The Chief Inspector will be explaining some of the operational changes that are allowing us to respond to upcoming issues in the borough. And obviously there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions and make your own observations as we bring these things to a conclusion. So a brief summary in terms of the objectives and the priorities that we identified for the year that we're currently in. Domestic abuse, unfortunately, has been an area of priority for us. And you'll see from the things that we've illustrated on the slide that we have continued and improved our one-stop shop arrangement and to support people who have experienced domestic violence in the borough. Now, this is a borough-wide activity, and the people who deliver the service are varied, including partners from the voluntary sector. I won't repeat everything that's on the slide, but I hope you will agree with me that there is a wide variety of things that we have been doing, and that in itself has encouraged people to report, and we can then provide more support for those people. Violent crime remains one of our strongest concerns in the borough, and we've highlighted here the particular connection with the nighttime economy, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you that Maidstone is a particularly big place for the nighttime economy, which is good in many ways for the businesses who are located here and for the people who enjoy all of those activities. But unfortunately, there are also examples of violent crime. And this just gives you an example of the things that we've been doing in order to prevent and to tackle the violent crime that occurs occasionally here. One of the examples of things that is being done differently is around the Public Spaces Protection Order, and you'll be very familiar with that because you made the decisions about what to implement, and that will come on stream in March. Substance misuse, this refers to a whole range of things, including the misuse of alcohol and also drugs. So you'll see that there are some encouraging signs in terms of the prevalence of us finding needles, for example, but this does remain a considerable area of concern. And what you'll see later is that we have fed this analysis through into the priorities for the upcoming year. It's really important that we maintain a focus on identifying what's happening locally and how we might be able to both reduce the risk for other members of the public as well as for those people who are in a position where they do misuse drugs and alcohol. Just for your information, we are also part of the Kent-wide drug and alcohol partnership. Their strategy is being refreshed at the moment, and we'll be inputting to that from our local knowledge of what happens in Maidstone. Reducing reoffending has been a key focus for us over the last year, and you'll see from the information contained here that there's actually been quite a lot of change in terms of, I think, what we would commonly refer to as the probation service. That has just changed the way in which we're able to support offenders and support them not to offend again in the future. But it also means that some of the information that we're used to receiving, we haven't yet received. And so we'll be building that into the strategic assessment over the coming year. Again, I think that you'll be able to see from the statistics here that there has been a positive impact. So there's been a reduction in the number of people, particularly young people, who are now going into the justice system. That has to be a good thing. And there's also, from what we can see from the statistics, a reduction in the reoffending as well. Community resilience was newly introduced into our strategic plan for this year. And we've done quite a lot of work in examining what information we have and the gaps in information that exist with respect to a number of key areas. CSE is short for child sexual exploitation. You will have heard a lot, I'm sure, in the national news about that, particularly connected with Jimmy Savile and others. You will have heard news, I think, repeated over time as concerns have been raised about children in sports clubs, those sorts of things. I think the thing that I would like to get across the most strongly is that Kent has been very proactive in establishing a multidisciplinary team comprising of social services, police and others, so that we can gather intelligence in an intelligent way, piece information together, so that we have a better understanding of the prevalence of CSE in our county, including in Maidstone. I wouldn't like to get this out of proportion. I think that we're taking a very structured and sensible approach, and I'm sure when Chief Inspector speaks in a moment, you'll be able to see how that is being handled at a local level. Prevent is the process by which collectively, that means ourselves, schools, people who work in the health sector, identify whether there may be issues of radicalisation of people. I think often people think of young people, but it really applies to anybody. And then piece that information together to see who may be at risk of becoming radicalised and then participating in other activities. I think it's fair to say that this is a small issue as far as Maidstone is concerned, but nevertheless it is important to be vigilant, and so that's the approach that we're taking. And the same is true of human trafficking. Serious organised crime, again, Chief Inspector will pick up on that in a moment, but this is an issue, I think, for all areas, and has association with things like the sale of controlled substances, that sort of thing. The real thrust, though, behind this work is that we are focusing on the people who are vulnerable and the threat, risk and harm to those people. And as we go through the rest of tonight's presentation, we'll be explaining how we're looking at those issues, so the vulnerability, threat, risk and harm, as opposed to perhaps the previous more simplistic approach of looking at volumes of crime and disorder. So we ourselves have created a multi-agency group to look at all these issues relating to community resilience. The first stage has been to understand what's going on more clearly, and then as we mature in that, then we will be able to be more proactive in the work that we carry out. And as you'll see here, we've done a number of desktop exercises to help us in that process. Road safety is an obvious area of concern, but we have some good news to report here in that the reported killed and seriously injured accidents, and of course all of those have to be reported, have shown a 20% reduction in those people affected over the 3-year period up to 2015, I believe. This is also an area where the predominant responsibility lies with two organisations, with the County Council and with the police. And so because we've seen such positive progress, and because there are such well-defined responsibilities for the individual partners within the Safer Maidstone Partnership. What we're proposing is that we discontinue this as an area of priority for the whole partnership. It won't diminish in importance for KCC and for the police, but as a partnership, we want to be concentrating on the things where working together is the most vital. So you'll see that theme followed through as I tell you about our proposed priorities for the next year. So, I've indicated earlier that the method by which we undertake the strategic assessment of crime and disorder has changed. We're now using something called the Morale methodology, and you can see what the acronym stands for there. It's Management of Risk in Law Enforcement. This is the first time that we've used the methodology here. It has been a joint piece of work. I'm sure we haven't got it perfect, and we'll still be learning in our application of the method. But as I said earlier, it is much more focused on risk as opposed to absolute numbers. We do have people here who actually carried out the assessment for us, so when we get to the end, if you've got questions about the precise nature of the method, then please feel free to ask them. Okay, so I think this just gives you, summarises what I've already said, and just the final point, it's okay, the final point to make is this is a method that is now being used widely, so it's not something that we've dreamed up and are doing independently of anybody else. It's a method that's being used across the country. Thank you. So, having applied that method, we've done an analysis of what has occurred in the borough either over the last year or the last 3 years, depending on which crime type we're talking about. If we look over the period since 2010, we've seen a very substantial reduction in antisocial behaviour, although if we compare last year with this year, we've seen a small increase. And you'll remember from the last year, we decided that we would not make antisocial behaviour one of our top 5 priority areas, but we would continue to monitor and we would continue to work closely in identifying and combating antisocial behaviour. We're proposing that we should continue with that approach. We're also proposing, on the basis of the information that you can see here about substance misuse, violent crime, that we continue to make those high areas of focus over the next year. That we don't do that for road safety, for the reasons that I've already explained. And that we increase our focus on the issues around community resilience. So that's CSE, prevent, human trafficking and serious organised crime. We're further suggesting that reducing reoffending should not be a priority in itself, but should be something that we pursue with respect to all these different types of crime and disorder. So it would be a cross-cutting theme as opposed to a priority on its own. Okay. Thank you. We have also looked very carefully at the priorities for the Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that we had a new Police and Crime Commissioner last year. It's good to see Councillor Gooch here, and Councillor Gooch represents this council on the Police and Crime panel. So that's a way of holding the Police and Crime Commissioner to account, but it also means that we've got a very good link in making sure that we consider how closely aligned our strategic approach is to what the Police and Crime Commissioner is doing. And I think what you'll see from this is that what we are doing is closely aligned. So he's particularly identified the impact for victims of abuse, substance misuse and antisocial behaviour. Or for us, the abuse and substance misuse are big issues that we need to focus on. And I think the things above there, delivering value for money, for example, I think it would be a brave person who argued against that as a principle. So I hope you'll agree by the time we get to the end of the presentation that what we're doing is consistent with what the Police and Crime Commissioner has said. He's made it clear in his public speeches and his consultation on his own strategy that mental health needs to be much more prominent in our tackling of crime and disorder, and we are also going to suggest when we get to the end of this that we have that as a focus for the next year as well. So, this slide here sums up the differences between this year's priorities, which are shown here for 16-17, and the proposals that we put to you as a result of the strategic assessment for 17-18. Now, you will have received a report in a lot more detail than this presentation, and you may well have questions as a result of that, and maybe we could take that in a few minutes at the end of the presentation. So, I'm going to hand over to, I was going to say my partner in crime, but it's probably not a very wise thing to say.
No, I've got quite a loud voice. Can anyone hear me? Or do I choose my, yeah? Okay, I think everybody in the room knows me. If not, Chief Inspector Mick Gardner from Maidstone. Been working with Alison for a little while now, so you've kept me. And the reason I'm going to sort of explain some of the changes, I think everybody has seen the Kent control strategies. I'm not going to run through those. They are as they are. And the rest of my presentation will try to explain how Kent Police are now moving towards looking after vulnerability, as well as trying to cover everything else. So we accept that our priorities may change as it ebbs and flows, but vulnerability is definitely the theme from the Chief. It's looking after our most vulnerable people. It's going to affect all of us, all of our partners, all of us in this room, I think, as we drive towards looking after the vulnerable, because we start to identify people. Every stone we turn will create work. But it's right that we do that, because we talk about looking after our children, preventing terrorism, and preventing the most serious offences occurring, preventing gangs from being established in the towns, preventing the supply of controlled drugs into the towns, into the rural, because they're everywhere. Okay, and we're preventing our sort of young people from being affected, and our most vulnerable adults as well with mental health. So I don't think there's any argument that we've got to move towards it. And our Chief Constable has told me that's what I'm doing, so that is what I'll try and deliver. Take into account the views of the public, etc., the views of Maidstone, but ultimately that's the way we're going to move forward. The first thing I'm talking about, we've talked to loads of different people about this. On the slide there, it just tells you who we try to engage with, and obviously our partners are well aware of what Kent Police's priorities are and what we're moving towards. We have time to read that, so we'll move on. I'm quite brief. I realise at the end it's probably best to ask me questions, but I'm not going to, spend a lot of time. So, PCSOs, valued resource. The Chief has pledged to keep those. 300 stay, which is excellent. So Maidstone gets our fair share of that, and I've fought hard for us to keep our numbers. We lose one or two into specialist roles. In fact, more than one or two, half a dozen. But that's the way it is. We keep the majority of them out visible, doing their current role, with a few extra powers. Not huge powers, because I don't want them off the street. You give them too many powers, they'll end up in custody areas, doing too much, they won't be visible. So we've kept it very limited. But things like truancy and that are coming in anyway, so we've gone with that. Okay, thanks. Okay, one of the new roles that we're looking at is I'm not going to go into all the acronyms. If you see the acronyms come up, you can ask me afterwards if you want, but there will be loads. This is about youth, and this is basically about getting back into the schools. You're probably aware Kent Police moved away from the schools liaison officer role as a PC role. I think it's totally vital, so we're moving back into it with a dedicated PCSO. We'll handpick the individual, so they'll be very good, and they'll go back into the schools around crime prevention, bullying, all this stuff and the cyber crime and the net, etc., that kids can get tied into. they'll have all that specialist training to go and try and prevent that and deal with it at the earliest possible stages. So that's coming back. Should never have gone, but it's coming back. Again, we look at a new vulnerable adult intervention, PCSO. That's because there's so much demand out there now. An ageing population, that's the future, which in itself creates demand on us. You're probably all aware that sort of mental health illnesses are taken over as the number one sort of killer, if you like. You know, certainly the number one thing that affects our adult population. So we're moving away from cancer and heart attack as being the greatest threat. It's now mental health. And probably everybody in this room has had somebody or contact with somebody who's been involved in that or had a disease. Certainly I have. So that role will come in to support our adults. I think that'll be excellent. I'll move through quickly. Domestic abuse. We've had a SPOC now in Maidstone for a little while. DC Mo Noland, done a lot of great work, including the set-up of multi-agency workshops, one-stop shops. We've been out into the community, which is why you'll see the rise in domestic abuse, because it was under-reported crime. It really is quite a highly reported crime. However, now, everything that is mentioned around domestic abuse, we will report a crime on. That's HMIC, the government, the drive. So, you know, if there's a parent slaps a child and it's reported, that will go down as domestic abuse. You know, is it lawful chastisement? I don't know, but it will definitely be reported as a crime. Everything will go through. This just professionalises that role. We've needed to do it for a long time, and it now professionalises that role into a dedicated role within the police service. Okay. Just give you some of the benefits, if you can read that. There's no problem, it's all right. Yeah. I think the ways of professionalism in domestic abuse, there can be no going back on it. We need to do it. That means that we understand it more, we can try and prevent it more. Okay, this is another one that's close to my heart. I've got 4 children. Those of us who've got children, we all know children. A lot of issues around our missing children end up with them going into other crime. Obviously not all the time, but they end up in it with issues. They can be recruited by gangs. They can end up in child sexual exploitation. They just end up generally being truant and not getting an education. So we're going to missing child liaison officer, another specialist role, with both police officers and PCSOs. They'll be dedicated to the Maidstone district and to all districts in Kent Police. Again, specialist training, working with the new vulnerability teams that are set up, which are our growth industry. Okay. Yes, the central referral unit. So this is what HMIC said basically is around that there's a consistent theme and threat to our children, and we need to have a consistent service with experts that we can deliver to safeguard our children, our vulnerable adults, our mental health, etc. So that's what we're setting up. Thank you. POLIT, again, this is basically your paedophiles. I don't think anybody could say that the police shouldn't invest in this, and we will do. We've got a specialist team. They're growing. It's a concern to the whole country. It's worldwide. But this specialist team have been doing a very good job targeting online paedophilia and grooming, etc. And that specialist function will now have its own base around Maidstone as well, which is good. Mental health we've already spoken about. Our own mental health team, based at Maidstone with the Maidstone SPOC, heavily working with Priority House, which creates huge demand for us all. Something that our North Kent and East Kent colleagues have had the luxury of more officers have been able to put somebody into those establishments to actually work with the mental health people. So we're going to try and do the same, try and reduce demand and care for those people. Thank you. That's really it. Other than me to say that one thing that I have kept, which you won't be with, the front line at Maidstone, most districts across Kent Police are reducing by between 5 and 30% reduction. Maidstone, got 100, and I keep 100. So I've fought hard. So my front line stays the same. we do lose that vulnerability crime across to experts as they get established, which is right. So we should be able to do our job even better on the streets of Maidstone, be more visible and deal with the rest of the crime with a little bit more time. So that's what we're looking to do. Thank you.
Thank you both for those presentations. Councillor Gooch, was there anything that you'd like to come up and ask before I go to members?
Yes, please, if I may, Chairman. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Very impressive presentation, and I have to say the documents were also very impressive. Can I just say, though, that it was full of acronyms, or I should say initialising. Now, my memory is NBG, but all the acronyms in here were definitely OTT. And I do think that we could do with a little ready reckoner, and I wish I'd have done myself one. Now, I appreciate that those of you who live and breathe this stuff, both our officers now, respected officer colleagues, you live and breathe it. You know what they all mean. You dream it. Did you shake your head? But to us mere mortals, it's mind-blowing. I wanted to say that you mentioned the Police and Crime Commissioner and what his priorities were, and whether or not they were, the safety partnerships were more or less in line. My feeling is, although I don't know it line by line, I would say certainly yes. And I recognised an awful lot of what was in these papers and what was in your presentations, very reflective. I did ask the Commissioner about the funding for the community safety partnerships at a recent panel meeting, and he was able to, dare I say, reassure that funding, certainly for 17-18, will certainly be in line with this year's funding, 16-17. But a bit worryingly, he did say that although he would fight tooth and nail, obviously, to try and maintain that funding throughout future years, that obviously if Kent Police per se get a bad knock, then that will ripple out. So I just thought I'd pass that by you. I don't want to panic anybody, but I'm just saying I'm feeling confident at the moment. But the other thing I wanted to say is the funding. Apparently there will be another opportunity for safety partnerships to apply for funding, which I think is useful to bear in mind. I know we've got later on, we're going to talk about, or dare I mention, no, I won't mention mobile cameras, but it's something to bear in mind, that there are opportunities out there, but it all relies on us working closely with the police. I won't rabbit on, forgive me, but I do feel quite passionate about this, and I do think that Maidstone, we should be very proud of the partnership that we've got. I just wonder how much of it actually relates to the man in the street, because I read somewhere here that apparently we've got an outstanding, keeping people safe and reducing crime is outstanding. I wonder if the bloke in the street recognises that. I wonder if he would agree. There is a wealth of stuff here that backs up the priorities that you're looking to have. I'm with you all the way, but how much of it actually relates to the people out there? I'm thinking of a local crime I know of, and I'm sure we can all think of one, where somebody's had some stuff nicked, they've reported it to the police, and I haven't heard a single sausage since. And yet I know from what you're telling me that you're working your damnedest. I also see here that road safety won't be a top priority. I understand that. The Borough Council's not directly responsible for it, and other authorities have that power too. But how are people out there going to take it? So I would ask you, please, to just consider how this is communicated. Please bear with me, Chairman. May I just ask one or two other questions, if I can find my page? Mental health. What I am concerned about is Section 136. I now know that, does it not take effect from April the 1st this year, which means that you cannot put any vulnerable person in your cells, the police cells. They have to have a safe place to go. Now, if my understanding is correct, I really would like some reassurance that you've made progress with making sure that you have got somewhere for these people to go. The police I have faith in, but with the greatest of respect, not all our health colleagues, because it's such an intricate communication network that there is with the health people. And I'm just wondering, with the greatest respect, I would like to see some reassurance that you're on the ball on that score. I'm nearly at the end, Chairman. Forgive me, but this is so important. Just tell me, what's a community trigger? That's the only question I actually have, because I don't know what you're talking about. Thank you. I saw it on page 26. You mentioned a community trigger. I thought, what on earth is that? Thank you very much indeed for the time, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nick, would you like to come back, or Alison? Charlie? Yeah.
I was going to deal with the funding. So, as Councillor Gooch has said, the Police and Crime Commissioner, over a number of weeks, had indicated, or seemed to have indicated, that the core funding that gets passported from the Home Office would continue to flow to the community safety partnerships, and we have had that now confirmed in writing. So the amount of money is £38,000, which is the same as last year, and we do have a good methodology for identifying what that money could be spent on, and then prioritising, because we always have more demand than there is resource available. If I may add to that as well, I was present at a presentation that the Police and Crime Commissioner made last week to Kent Council leaders, and he was also flagging up other opportunities to bid, either the voluntary sector or community safety partnerships, for particular streams of funding relating to his top priorities, including things, mental health projects. So we'll be very alert to that, and I do think that we've got a good track record of making sure that we're on the ball. We identify when those bidding opportunities arise, and then we're successful in making those bids and securing money to invest for the Maidstone community. I entirely take your point about the perception, and therefore the need to communicate and message clearly about what our priorities are going forward, so that we don't create the impression that work won't be done, for example, on road safety. It will just be done in a different way, and our joined up working as a partnership will be focusing on other things. That, I'm sure, will not reduce the amount of time and effort that, for example, the highways engineering team at KCC spend on engineering solutions for casualty reduction. I'm going to leave the much more tricky things on place of safety and community triggers to my colleague.
Okay. There's a couple of things I've picked up on there, which is about the worry that we're not going to be able to attend and deal with every crime that occurs in a Rolls-Royce service. Well, we're not. That's not going to happen. We will have to threat, risk, harm those. If it's a vulnerable victim, if it's a repeat victim, if it's a high value, if there's something around a pattern that we can identify, if there's significant lines of inquiries that can lead to offenders, then we may well have a lot of contact with the victim. However, you have to look at the fact we're moving towards a sort of world of technology. We're going to record crime online. We're going to do it all by forms. Certainly our younger generations will be looking to do that quite consistently, and have all their updates possibly carried out by that. So this almost faceless contact may increase. But where we see or identify any kind of victim that's vulnerable or there's some significant harm involved, we will do our best to attend those, and we should attend them all. We're creating a new unit, which we've got already in Kent Police, to record the crimes. They're called the IMU. But they will basically record everything that's phoned in from a victim. And they will now become what we call armchair detectives, if anyone's ever heard that phrase. So they're going to operate from behind the phone, from online, and identify whether the crime's got any other lines of inquiries that need an officer to attend. Because if it doesn't, then that may well be filed, we call it filed at source. It's just going to be filed and not dealt with. We'll action those that are solvable and those that have got harm, threat, risk and harm linked to them. I think it's a sensible approach. So hopefully that's covered that one. Mental health, well, you're right. I don't think our partners are fully ready for the change. I think they've looked at it, talked to us about it, but they're not fully ready to take on their responsibilities. Even now, in the last week, there are instances of people in police cells for, even at Maidstone, for 24, 36 hours, taken my intervention to the director level to achieve a bed. And even to the case of them saying, well, go to Lancashire. Well, we're not going to take somebody to Lancashire. You know. So there are problems with that side of the services. Will it get any better in April? I'm always honest with you. I think there's a long way to go with it. I think there are a lot of issues that need resolving. What it will do, eventually, is put those people in the right hands with the right care, because we're not the right people to care for people. But I still think if it comes to it, despite whatever the rules are, police officers will do the right thing. So when it comes to somebody who's at risk of serious harm or whatever, they will do the right thing. That means we continue to use the cells, we will use them. Or the hospital, or wherever, some facility, until it's fully established. So you're right to raise it. It's something that's on the radar. There's a centralised mental health team. It's part of their ongoing work to solve that. What we need to do is try and reduce the number of people who are vulnerable and end up escaping and being at large, which is why we're going to put somebody into Priority House.
Yeah, and on that, we're also looking to have not just a single point of contact inside Priority House, we're trying to get to people before they get to crisis point. We're putting a lot of things in place to try and prevent the crisis happening in the first place, because then that will relieve the pressure of the bed being needed. So we're putting some efforts into that along the same lines as we have with domestic abuse, to try and reach out early, to use other partners, and to get the help to people, having a mental health nurse in the control room. So when we get calls from people in crisis, they can actually talk to a nurse, as opposed to talking to one of our dispatchers, and see if we can help them and divert them at that point. So we can't solve the bed issue, but we are going to try and get there sooner to prevent the bed issue being an issue, if that makes sense. It's the best we can do, really.
Is there anything else? There's a community trigger question, which Matt might have put that one in. Go on, Matt.
Okay, Matt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think mental health as a priority, I suppose, for the partnership really to get a grip of, we have to look at crisis intervention opportunities where we have people that have issues in their life, their vulnerabilities mean that they go through stages of engaging with services up until a point where they enter a crisis within their kind of mental health condition and their lives. Which I think is quite often when the police are called to deal with that crisis. So the opportunity really is to look at how we can intervene at an earlier opportunity. And there are projects that have been tried in other areas, such as mental health crisis cafes, located in areas where people who have got a mental sort of issue can go and seek support before they reach crisis point, before the police need to go and get involved and use their sort of powers under the Mental Health Act. I think your other point about the strategic assessment and how it relates to the man on the street, the strategic assessment is very much a working document. It's a collection of facts and figures that enables the partnership to kind of have a test, really, of where things are at, what priorities are starting to come out. And it is a very difficult document to make easily digestible. I think actually if you sit there and read it in its entirety, it probably will solve insomnia in a matter of minutes. I think we have made the suggestion that we create a much shorter summary document. We have got a Community Safety Partnership Away Day later this week, which will start to try and action plan some of the priorities that have been talked about today, and they will be included within the Community Safety Plan, which we will write for release from the 1st of April. Now, the plan is a much more easily digestible document. It sets out exactly what we propose to do and ideally how we are going to achieve it. So it will have some very high-level strategic outcomes and then some actions underneath that to describe how we will go ahead and deal with those priorities. The community trigger was something that was introduced with the changes to the antisocial behaviour tools and powers sort of back in 2014. And the idea really was to enable members of the public and community groups who felt that their complaints around antisocial behaviour, if they hadn't been treated seriously, if they'd made a number of complaints and felt that they hadn't received a suitable resolution, the community trigger was a mechanism for them to challenge agencies within the Community Safety Partnership around that response. It was often referred to as councillor call for action, because quite often councillors were approached by members of the public around this sort of issue, but the community trigger kind of put a structure in place for how they could do that. The idea being they could, I think, visit the council's website to report antisocial behaviour, and one of the options for them there is, would they want to implement the community trigger? And they can obviously then put some details around the issues that they'd reported, when they'd reported them, and why they felt they'd not received an adequate level of service. That then prompts us to go away and actually look at their issue, their complaint, and provide them with a response on how it was handled. And that really was what the community trigger was aimed to introduce. We are required to include within the strategic assessment details of any community triggers that have been enacted, and we've never had one. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'd just like to come in there. We're getting lots of information tonight. I understand you're in the same quandary as anybody else in this country at this particular time. How do we get around it? I think we do need to be more honest with the people on the street, bring it down, say it as it is. But I'm getting the feeling, and this is music to my heart, is that we all have our own responsibilities as councils, as the police, as NHS, everything. We won't solve the mental crime issue until those people make the push of it. So I do understand. But what we've got to do is, and some of us don't like thinking about it, I'm very passionate about anything with children, and I'll never go away from that. We don't know what goes on behind closed doors. And this just didn't find them the same night. It's months, it's years. And that's something you can't really go around and celebrate. God forbid we never hear about it where someone's been killed, because that's saying. So we're always going to have half, aren't we? Half that we don't sort of understand, because when we call we would like a policeman. But then the other side is we've got to realise that there's certain things, as I say, that go on behind closed doors we don't know about. So really, I think my question is, have you now understood, because you know what I feel about partnerships, that when they come round the table, the so-called partners, they've got to play their bit as well. That's what I'm really strong about. And do you have sorry to ask this question, I could have asked one of my officers, do you actually have a welfare mental health professional that sits in the Safer Mates Partnership? That's all I'm asking.
I think when we look at our safeguarding policies and procedures, you know, we look at vulnerabilities and we look at mental health. I don't think we have a trained mental health professional directly involved with the CSU, but we involve partners from Community Mental Health Trust, from the Clinical Commissioning Group, and it is something that I think is starting to become a much more current topic for us to focus on.
Okay, with that. Councillors, any questions? Councillor George.
Thank you. It was a positive presentation, and I must admit there was a few things that you mentioned that my ears pricked up on. And I suppose the biggest one, because I deal with it surprisingly enough quite a bit as a ward councillor, is the bullying in schools, and when parents are going up to the school time after time and they don't get anywhere. So when you mentioned there being a school officer that's going to come back, I know over the years I've been a councillor, we've worked very closely with them. So that's something that I'm looking forward to happening. So my question is, the things that you're prioritising and saying is going to happen, that's going to happen quite quickly this year, is it? Or is it something that's spread out over time? I just wanted some sort of time scale on things.
Yeah, I mean, the development of these teams starts now. Some of the posts are already in place. There's a gradual process that they'll be filled between now and September. Obviously, Kent Police, a huge amount of recruiting going on, as you're probably aware. We've got some sort of 60 constables coming in every couple of months for the whole rest of the year. So there's quite a drive through the organisation. They won't be fully established and functioning by September, but there will certainly be the hierarchy set up. There will be constables and detective constables and PCSOs in those posts, and gradually their roles and responsibilities will develop. So the Chief wants the structure in place by September, and obviously we'll learn and grow as we develop. So
we are in the community safety unit already using, because I'm in charge of the PCSOs, and I'm already using them more towards these roles in preparation for the roles coming in September. So, for example, we review every single vulnerability call that comes into Maidstone, gets reviewed by Detective Constable, every single call. And from then, if a PCSO needs to attend, and that could be a victim of bullying, or something that hasn't come to the police attention to have a uniformed police officer arrive, they just wanted some advice, or they were just concerned about something, that now gets reviewed by a detective, and a PCSO is sent to the home to see the family and see if there's anything more we can do. And so far we've started that about a month and a half ago. We've reviewed over 600 calls. And that's just the Maidstone CSU. So though the official role is not until September, vulnerability and including those bullying victims or any other vulnerable member of society is getting an enhanced service from last month. So we're putting small steps in place.
I don't want to stop everybody in midstream, but we were supposed to finish at 7:50. That was to give you a break, a comfort break. But I'm quite happy to go on if our guests are quite happy to stay for a little while longer to answer questions. So if we could just keep it down, our questioning, absolutely fine. So if you'd like to come back on this, fine.
The response that's making me come back, just to say that sounds really good, positive, but all I'm saying is, following on from something Councillor Gooch said, it's only as good as people knowing that that is going to be in place to use. Parents don't always want to pick up the phone and talk to a police officer, but if I said I could get in touch with the community team and there is someone, I think that is what I would love to be able to do, and I'm sure there's other councillors that would like to do that as well. Thank you.
Sorry, to keep us up to date. We need this knowledge and it needs to come from our own officers. Thank you. Councillor Burton?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just really quickly like to say thank you very much for the presentation, and also thank you for the very candid nature of some of your responses, in particular to say that, you know, there will be cases with the ever-decreasing pool of resources where actually you have to prioritise and there won't necessarily be the response that everybody wants to their call, etc., etc. I'm sure we all around this table as councillors get emails and phone calls that say, I've logged this and this isn't happening, and it is about communicating the reasons for that. So thank you very much. I've got a few questions. There's two little groups to this. The first is on the domestic abuse section of this report. There's the one-stop shops that are written about at length in here. There's a fantastic increase in attendance to these. But something that wasn't included in the presentation was actually the reduced number of repeat visits. And I was wondering if, I know it's probably very difficult data to capture, but whether you could shed some light on why you think that is perhaps happening, and whether it has a link to the fact that when visitors were asked who they'd like to see at these one-stop shops, they're saying solicitors, housing and mental health. And are those people engaged in the one-stop shops? The second little block of questions was reducing reoffending. It's been mentioned already that that's going to become cross-cutting as opposed to a single priority on its own. I was wondering if you could elucidate a little bit what that actually means operationally in practice, because it sounds incredibly logical. I just wonder what that actually means to the average person out in the street who actually might have some personal experience of this. And sort of in relation to that, really, you got very similar comments about mental health being prevalent in so many topics, and yet as opposed to that being considered cross-cutting, it's being given its own priority. Now, I understand they're very different things, but I was just wondering what the rationale behind the two different treatments was.
I'm just going to start on the domestic as myself. Inspector, actually, now.
For the day. One-stop shop is attended by solicitor, housing, mental health. I've not been to one for a while. I think so. I'm just looking to... No? I think so, but definitely the others. And as they come in, they can say who they want to speak to primarily. There's also someone from the police there as well to speak to. You're right, most of the time they don't want to speak to the police, they want to speak to the other agencies, and that's why it's so important, and it works incredibly well. A lot of people don't want to criminalise the behaviour, they don't feel that they're a victim, they just want some advice, and they know if they come to the police, our positive crime recording will record it as a crime, because that's what we do. So they can speak there to professionals that can help them without them feeling like they have to go through the process, so it's incredibly successful, but yes, the other partners are there.
I'll talk about offender management. I mean, that's quite key. Obviously, you've got your violent crime professional team to deal with that. You've got your sexual offences teams. So they're all specialists who deal with the reoffending on that. What we're looking to do, why it's going to be so sort of cross-cutting, is that your offender management, because we've got probation embedded at Maidstone Police Station with us, is that we'll look at vulnerability as well. So now where we looked at sort of burglary or drug dealing, we'll also look at domestic abuse. So if you've got a repeat offender that's involved in that, so a repeat victim, then we'll look to get them onto the IOM scheme. That's the scheme, offender management scheme that we run. And that can involve all sorts of conditions, including buddy tags, you've probably heard of, which track people's location 24/7, so we know where they are. If there's any breaches, we're going to deal with that. So we're looking to expand that offender management right across all your vulnerability.
We can also refer suspects or offenders of domestic abuse onto courses to prevent offending, and that has had real positive influence. We've even had one offender write a letter of thanks to his investigating officer to thank him for forcing him onto this programme as part of his conditions, because he now realises his behaviour is wrong, it's not treated the cause of his behaviour, and he feels a changed man, and if it's worked then great. So I think that's what it means. We are trying to change behaviours long term across every crime type as opposed to just what the IOM used to help.
Very quickly, Matt.
Thank you. So the other part of my question at the end then, because it still strikes me that a similar sort of cross-cutting approach then to mental health, which is prevalent in so many different areas, I'm just wondering why then that's a separate thing, but...
What I think you'll see in terms of the pattern of how we've worked over the last few years is that when we're grappling with something newly, or it's become a more an issue that's more exposed, if you like, then we've focused a particular priority on it until we've got to grips with what sort of method to work with, and to the point where we feel that we can embed that across all our areas of work. So you're absolutely right, mental health is something that could feature in any of the things that we've talked about this evening. Yeah. But we know that there are changes in responsibilities coming, changes in the way in which we're working. And so it would be what we're proposing is that we do make that a very prominent, high-level priority, very transparently. Then we can look at how we're responding, and then you can hold us to account on that in particular. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mortimer.
Thank you. I'll be very brief as I can. Again, mental health, it's all been picked up this, and basically I'd just like to say that mental health is nothing new. It's always been there. And I think people are saying, oh, we recognise it, and the authorities, the police, etc., we're beginning to recognise it. It's been recognised for donkey's years, and society has not brought it forward and put it in priorities. And I've dealt with a few people at Priority House and things over the years on different matters, and it is so important. And I think we can, if we hit that button on mental health, I think we can solve lots and lots of other things as well. Going back to the communication side of things and what people aren't communicating, and probably the police fall down on this sometimes, is that I still get complaints about the 101 service quite regularly. And I get things like people not being visited, which again falls into your point regarding the older population, because they like to see a policeman, they like to have a letter, they like to have something once they've reported it. So that fear of crime is almost growing. That's what I find all the time as well. And if I can just pick up regarding the violent crime, on page 22, it's got violent crime, nighttime economy down the bottom. There's a bold paragraph at the bottom, and it says, violent crime in Maidstone is reported in the CSP rolling plan, and violent crime will remain a priority. However, it doesn't remain a priority in the new, for this year. Now, I know there's grey areas, etc., but I just thought it was a bit of a contradictory statement, basically.
So it says domestic abuse and violent crime. This bullet point here. Maybe we've confused it by... Yes. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Mortimer. Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be as brief as possible. I do recognise faces in this room who took part in a scrutiny report that we did about 4 years ago about mental health. And at that point, I think there was a pilot scheme down in East Kent where you had a mental health nurse going out with the police at night, and I think it really did help. And the fact you have a mental health nurse in, or a professional actually in the control room, I would imagine is a great help for those who are taking the calls, because they've got that point of reference, which is incredibly important. So I think it's really good that we did have a scrutiny look at something, and then we've got those outcomes that have happened, which is positive. Just picking up on two things. You've mentioned a social media campaign targeted at 18+. I'm slightly puzzled, because what about those that are of a younger generation? Apparently the average age for a mobile phone now, for your first mobile phone, is 7. I don't really understand that, but there we are. So I'm intrigued as to why it's 18+ and not younger. And the other thing that I picked up on from your presentation was reducing the strength of beer that is sold, or alcohol that is sold, in supermarkets, when we've got establishments across town that are selling strength beers of about 5+%. So I'm just trying to balance those two things. You can't buy it in certain places, but you can go into a recognised establishment and buy it.
Anybody would like to answer?
Yep, certainly. I'll certainly take on the first one around the reduced strength scheme. Other areas have looked at off licences, not just supermarkets, but general off licences, selling cider, beer and lager with strength of over 6.5%. Yeah, 6.5 is now classified as high. Obviously, anything over 5 could be classified as high, but specifically 6.5. And that's across the board that we're looking to target and get off the shelves because of the prevalence it's got with preloading for young people and everybody else prior to going to the clubs and pubs for nighttime economy. Also street drinkers as well, and the associated health risks that they particularly incur. We found that substance misuse charities obviously find it a lot easier to converse for a longer period of time with a street homeless person who hasn't been drinking either so much or of a lesser amount. So that's kind of, we're looking primarily to target the town centre, because that's where the main issues are at the moment. We don't find that supermarkets themselves are selling, if they are selling high strength alcohol, it's not at low cost. We're looking at some alcohol which is around about 15 pence a unit, which is very, very, very cheap, especially say 2 litre bottles of high strength cider, for example. That's kind of where we're looking to target.
Sorry, Matt. Is that? Are you answering on the same question, or?
Yes, in part, and also
the next one.
I think it's important to note that the supermarkets sell in bulk. You know, we're talking about cases of beer, not necessarily buying in bulk of high-strength alcohol. I think what we're looking at with the Reduce the Strength campaign is a voluntary agreement with off-licences that sell lower numbers of higher-strength alcohol, which then is drunk in the street, which then links to the kind of crime disorder and antisocial behaviour issues that the police end up having to then come and mop up. The social media campaign is being targeted to kind of 18 plus for sort of 2 reasons. One, because of the ways in which you can actually run a marketing campaign on various social media sites, but also because one of the key issues with domestic abuse is looking at the younger age groups in 2 aspects. One, children that are witness to domestic abuse, and safe relationship campaigns being run through the schools. Now, obviously, the schools are doing some work on that themselves. It is something that the domestic abuse group is kind of looking at. But the social media campaign was really designed to look at a particular age group, to encourage reporting and to look at making sure that people are aware that an abusive relationship isn't just about physical violence, but it's also about coercion and control in a relationship. And actually getting that message out there that it doesn't have to be just physical violence is very important.
Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, can I just come back on that? I accept what you're saying about the domestic abuse, and lots of people think it might be husband or wife or some, etc. However, I think there is an increased prevalence, bearing in mind you've got marital breakdown that's becoming incredibly common, where it's sons against mothers. And my feeling is that is something which is hidden, but from what I'm observing, or the calls that I've taken, certainly that is on the increase.
Yeah, that's what we refer to as adolescent to parent violence. It is something that is picked up by the Early Help Service through KCC. It is something that's very challenging to deal with, and I think when we're looking at moving the demand from domestic abuse services from the sort of MARIC kind of environment where you've got a high risk to a victim through to earlier stages of intervention, it's very important that we make that shift so that children that are witness to domestic abuse at a very young age don't then grow up into a situation where they're perpetrating that kind of abusive relationship back on their parents. But that's kind of a generational shift that we've got to look at educating the children at a younger opportunity and come up with interventions to deal with the teenagers who are being abusive, and looking at perpetrator programs for adults so that we can intervene at an earlier opportunity before somebody is actually charged with a criminal offence and then sort of made to go on a perpetrator program by engagement through the probation service. What we want is a voluntary scheme that helps people assess their behaviour and assess how they're responding to their partners before it gets to physical violence and a victim potentially has been assaulted a number of times before they pluck up the courage to call the police or go to a one-stop shop.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to say this, I'd like to wave a magic wand to a lot of the questions that have been asked of you tonight. Are never going to happen, and I've never been blinkered that these things haven't been going on for absolutely years. You're just getting less and less staff to be able to hold on. So, thank you very much. I do worry about we, because it gives a perception that we're going to cure everything. That's never going to happen with all the greatest will in the world. And I do get really upset, this is me just talking, that it's always the town. Always the town. And there's like a little bit called urban area. And even from the bits that you've put in there, my ward's still got the IS going on with domestic violence and crime. And I must admit, Jodie did sit here last year and tell me that they would be working on it. So all I'm saying is, I'm not going to scream and shout and blame you, because I think you're being asked to do jobs that technically would not be your responsibility in certain areas. So I hope as councillors we work on the partners to say, we need your help and you've got to be doing what is expected of you. Sorry, mental health, I'd go to my GP, I wouldn't go to a policeman. So, thank you very much. Sorry to bring it down, but we can't make promises that you can't give. And we all try as councillors, don't we, bit by bit to help people, but we're not going to cure all this. So, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's been interesting. Thank you. And will I see you next year? Oh no, we got to go back to recommendation. Oh no, we're seeing you in March, aren't we? Some of you, anyway, officers. Sorry. So, this report makes the following recommendation to the final decision maker, that the Communities, Housing and Environment Committee recommend to Council that the 2017-18 strategic assessment is adopted and implemented by the Safer Menston Partnership. Can I? Oh, sorry. Unanimous? Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.